In the rewrite tonight, we're on drugs.
I'm not for funding public broadcasting.
We're on drugs. We're on drugs.
I know.
That was last night's presidential debate, where the moderator, Larry King, had to remind the candidates that they were on drugs. What Larry meant, of course, at that point, was that the candidates were supposed to be discussing drug policy. That's right, there was a presidential debate last night that was not covered by the major networks because it did not include any candidates who are running above 15% in the polls. But it did include candidates who dared to talk about important issues that never came up in the presidential debates watched by 60 million people. The Free and Equal Elections Foundation sponsored a debate in Chicago last night with 4 presidential candidates: Gary Johnson of the Libertarian Party, Jill Stein of the Green Party, Rocky Anderson of the Justice Party, and Virgil Goode of the Constitutional Party. They discussed the war that the Democratic and Republican candidate refused to discuss, America's longest war, the war on drugs.
90% of the drug problem is prohibition-related, not use-related. So let's legalize marijuana now. I am not a hypocrite on this issue. I have drank alcohol, I've smoked marijuana.
The most important thing we can do to get rid of the health problems associated with marijuana is to legalize it.
We don't just need to legalize marijuana, we need to end drug prohibition just like we ended alcohol prohibition.
I would cut federal spending on the war on drugs. However, drug use is primarily a state issue, not a federal issue. I am not for legalizing marijuana use or other drug use.
And imagine if Congress passed a bill that the president signed that allowed indefinite detention without charge or trial. That would be issue 1 at any presidential debate, wouldn't it? The media's favorite debate moderator, Martha Raddatz, would have forced a full discussion of that one at the vice presidential debate, wouldn't she? Well, Congress did pass that law last year, and President Obama signed it, and he never mentioned it on his list of accomplishments in any of the debates. And he was never asked about it, not by the media's second favorite debate moderator, Candy Crowley, and not by Mitt Romney. It never came up at the two-party presidential debates. No one pressed the president on how he could possibly sign a bill like that into law, and no one pressed Mitt Romney about why repealing that law is not on his day one list. If that law worries you, if it concerns you in any way, your concern, your interest in that law is not represented by either of the two major parties. But at last night's debate, that law was called the very definition of tyranny.
That spells tyranny. It's the very definition of tyranny.
I would have vetoed the National Defense Authorization Act, allowing for you and I, as U.S. citizens, to be arrested and detained without being charged.
This is unallowable and is a basic offense against the very foundation of American liberty, and it should be repealed.
One sentence answer, Larry. If I were president, I would have vetoed NDAA.
In the instantly immortal words of Larry King, we're on drugs. The media is feeding you a drug called the two-party system. Big media is incapable of covering a political landscape that is more complicated than the two-party system. Big media does not have the resources or the interest or the intellectual capacity to cover something more complicated than the two-party system. The two-party system and the Electoral College have conspired to make most voters feel irrelevant to the outcome of the presidential election. The major party candidates ignore most states, and they ignore most voters most of the time, and then we act surprised that voter turnout is so low. They never really campaign in more than 10 states, and now they're campaigning in even fewer than that. Like most Americans, I have never lived in and voted in a state that mattered in a presidential campaign. I first voted in Massachusetts, then in New York. Now I vote in the biggest state in the Union, California, the state with the most electoral votes and the most voters, and the one that is always completely ignored by the presidential campaigns because it is not a battleground state. The outcome in California is never in doubt. If, like most Americans, you live in one of the states where the outcome is predetermined, you should feel absolutely free to take a good long look at third-party candidates and pick one whose ideas you want to encourage. Your vote for the Libertarian or the Green Party will not affect the outcome in a state where the president or Mitt Romney has a big lead. But your vote will say something important about what you believe. The bad news about living in a state like California is that you're completely ignored in the presidential campaigns. The good news is you can consider voting for a third-party candidate without any worry that your vote might tip the balance the wrong way in the Electoral College. If you want to see the entire third-party debate, you can find it on our blog, thelastword.msnbc.com. You will be told you're wasting your vote if you vote for a third-party candidate because the third-party candidate is not going to win the presidency. Well, I guess that means everyone who voted for John McCain for president or John Kerry for president wasted their votes too. Having spent my lifetime in states irrelevant to the Electoral College, I have mostly, in fact, voted for third-party candidates for president. And I was always told I was wasting my vote. When I voted for Democrats for president who lost, I was never told I was wasting my vote. I have actually voted for the winner of the presidency exactly once. So please don't try to tell me that voting for a candidate who loses is wasting a vote in a democracy. If you live in a battleground state, voting for a third-party candidate can be a lot dicier. Just ask the people who voted for Ralph Nader in Florida in 2000. If you're lucky enough to live in a state that the presidential candidates care about, then your vote really does count in the way most people want it to. Then you really should think about who you want to see take the oath of office when you cast your vote. Because your vote matters much, much more than mine.